Another Steam Next Fest come and gone, and let me tell you, I put my hard drive to work installing and playing all the demos I could. I played more than 60 demos, and in this video, I'm gonna go through and give you my impressions on the most notable ones to me. A couple of things. Practically all the games featured are going to be from the action genre, so if you're looking for games outside that, you're out of luck, though there are a few exceptions here and there, I think. Next is that I'm trying to bring attention to weird and interesting indie games, so don't expect me to be covering popular big-budget titles. You don't need me to tell you that, say, Ys 10 Nordics is going to be absolute fire. Alright, with that preamble out of the way, let's get into this. Next Fest started off strong with Hark The Ghoul, a first-person action RPG, aka Kingsfield-like. It's got nice combat where you juggle melee, guns, and spells. It's got deep and complex levels to explore with loads of secrets and loot to find, all set in a creepy, bug-infested world that's like a mix of Bloodborne and Hollow Knight. The cherry on top? It's got a Dark Messiah kick that can not only be used to cleverly dispatch enemies, but can also push crates around for you to get your Sim on. No major complaints here. If you like games like Lunacid, Dread Delusion, Monomyth, any of those kind of games, wishlist this pronto.
That's damn good.
Chrono Sword looks to deliver a Souls-like action RPG experience, but done in a brand new, pixely, isometric perspective. It delivers all the typical exploration and combat you'd want from a Souls-like or a Metroidvania, and as you'd expect from the name, there's a bit of a time travel mechanic where you go back and forth between past and future to help you progress. It's promising, but I'm a bit hesitant. I'm not sure how involved time travel is going to be since, at least in the demo, it was rather simple and linear, making it feel a bit token. More so than that though, the isometric perspective really hurt the visual clarity for me, making both exploration and particularly combat confusing to parse. Still, there's enough good in here to consider keeping your eyes on this one as it develops.
Not too bad.
Metalbringer is an action roguelite hack and slasher where you undertake expeditions into a robo-infested city to find your mother, growing your arsenal with each attempt. Similar to the developer's previous game, Samurai Bringer, this game has a big focus on two things: combat, which involves cleaving through huge hordes of enemies, a la Dynasty Warriors or Dead Rising, and incredibly deep customization of your loadout, not only for your pilot character, but your mech as well, which you'll build up from a humble forklift to a Gundam by collecting salvage and ripping parts off of enemy mechs. I'm impressed with it, but I have to admit I found it kind of overwhelming and confusing in a lot of respects. Just wasn't sure what exactly I was supposed to be doing on my expeditions. The time limit added a lot of pressure, and fighting those huge crowds could get so out of hand, especially when explosives and enemy mechs are added to the mix. It has enough charm to it, though, that I kept wanting to dig deeper, so definitely consider giving it a look.
Not too bad.
I've been meaning to check out more of these GZ Doom games, and Mohrta was a nice start, being a dark fantasy Souls-like FPS. Thinking on it, maybe instead of Souls-like, it should be called a Hexen-like? Anyway, while it was a rather straightforward boomer shooter experience at first, eventually I got to a Demon Souls-style hub world where it really opens up, allowing you to travel to all these different worlds with sprawling, non-linear exploration. While it can be a little clunky and simple in terms of its functionality due to the limitations of the GZ Doom engine, I still found myself having a lot of fun. I liked how it rewarded aggression by having enemies drop mana for special moves that dissipates if you don't pick it up quickly enough, and boss fights were a highlight for me. More so than anything else though, I just thought the vibes that the game's world and lore gave off were really weird and intriguing, similar to adventures in other games like Dread Delusion. So if you're into that, be sure to check this out.
Hey, this works.
If you miss the days of wisecracking heroes and big, glowy power-ups, Gravelord has you covered, being pretty much a classic boomer shooter akin to something like Serious Sam, Duke Nukem, and Quake. The one notable mechanic is that you earn and equip up to 3 tiers of these perk cards at a time as you go through the levels, with some of the perks being pretty neat, like summoning rats on kills or turning your shovel into a throwable teleporter and so on. Apart from that, it's just another boomer shooter clone, but hey, I followed Fatbot Games in the first place because they made Vaporum, which, despite being just a Grimrock clone, I enjoyed immensely, so hey, whatever works.
While we're at it, consider this a bonus recommendation to play Vaporum.
That said, I did take umbrage to the fact that shooting the double barrel shotgun doesn't trigger a cool reload animation like you'd see in Doom or Serious Sam. Come on, bruh. Elite Exorcist Miko is a Hololive-themed anime shmup, and while this is a definite no-brainer for fans of Hololive, obviously, I'd say that similar to other Hololive-themed games like Holocure, this has a lot going for it as a shmup in general, so people not infected with VTuber brain rot will still find something good to play here. The fundamentals seem solid with great enemy and boss design, and it's got a lot of interesting mechanics like style switching, resource management, melee attacks, parries, equipment crafting, and so on that I was already getting addicted to replaying levels over and over. Not just to unlock equipment, not just to go for higher scores, but just to have fun.
Hey, this works.
While we're on the topic of anime, we may as well talk about AI Limit, an anime sci-fi Souls-like very akin to games like Code Vein. You know the drill. Wake up with amnesia in a dingy cell, bears seek lest. While most of the mechanics are very similar to anyone who's played a Souls game, of note is that you don't have stamina or mana, instead having a sync meter, which is kinda like adrenaline. You get sync through standard melee attacks and spend it on special moves, range spells, as well as shield blocks and parries. So you have a nice back and forth of generating and spending, with other caveats being that you become very frail if it's too low, so don't overspend. So yeah, I'd say this game is for the more complex combat lovers, a la Nioh, Sekiro, and as mentioned, Code Vein. It's not necessarily Lies of P level of quality, and it is just another Souls-like, but I'd say it does enough to deliver a very fun experience.
That's damn good.
In a world stuffed with Souls-likes, Butcher's Creek stands apart by being a Condemned-like. That's right. It's a first-person horror melee combat game that has you bludgeoning cannibal hobos with various blunt objects to escape your imprisonment in their compound. This game goes all in on the gory decadence, reminding me of games like Manhunt. For example, while you might think you're a hapless victim, your character came to the compound willingly searching for snuff tapes, which is a resource that not only increases your max health the more you carry, but has to be used to save the game at TVs. Also, the only way you recover health is by pulling out your camera and taking pictures of gore, like some demented Frank West. As a fan of Condemned, I wanna like it, and I do think it shows a lot of potential, especially with its atmosphere, but I felt a bit let down by the gameplay, which was very simplistic melee combat and not much else to make up for it, like puzzles or exploration. I'll keep an eye on it though, since it is by the Dusk dev after all, so it's got quite the pedigree.
Not too bad.
In a world where Me Games is gone, other devs are stepping up to fill the void. In comes Stone of Madness, a squad-based stealth tactics game similar to Commandos, but with the atmosphere of Darkest Dungeon and Blasphemous. In this, you're not a band of hardened mercs wiping out Nazis, but a group of pitiable wretches struggling to escape an insane asylum while dealing with their phobias. You'll find your standard Me game fare here. Sneaking around vision cones of guards, distracting them with thrown stones, collecting keys and intel, but not only do you need to deal with the guards, you need to handle the extra layer of your crew's phobias as well, which drain their sanity if mishandled. For example, you might want to sneak around in the dark, obviously, but your strongman is afraid of being in the dark, so you must make the priest light the way for them. Likewise, you may want the girl to kill a guard, but she'll feel remorse by doing so, and the priest hates to see violence, so make sure you don't do it around him. Suddenly, every encounter felt like I was solving that classic river-crossing logic puzzle. I don't know if everyone will be on board with the stressful management and the heavy, depressing themes, and the controls can take a bit of getting used to, but I'm sure the hardcore crowd can dig it.
Hey, this works.
If I were to sum up Project Silverfish, it would be Furry Stalker. As in, it's a hardcore PvE extraction shooter where you go on expeditions into the exclusion zone to complete quests for various factions, all while being wary of other soldiers, monsters, anomalies, and your own survival needs like food and water. For me, this was my way of finally being able to experience the extraction shooter craze, but in a more comfortable single-player fashion. While it has some hardcore aspects, such as only saving on zone transition, meaning death can take a lot of progress away from you, I enjoyed the tension of sneaking around random enemies, duking it out in the environment, slowly accumulating enough cash and loot to gear myself up to take on even harder jobs. Still a lot of questions since it's in early alpha, like whether there's a main story quest, how deep are the faction interactions, and so on, but what's there is definitely promising enough to keep an eye on it for me.
Hey, this works.
For fans of Gauntlet, Diablo, and, well, Heroes of Hammerwatch 1, comes Heroes of Hammerwatch 2, an action roguelike RPG where you venture out to smite hordes of monsters, level up, equip gear, and acquire resources to expand your town with new features. I found it to be a pretty decent hack and slash experience, very similar to Heroes of Hammerwatch, just with a shiny coat of paint. The combat in particular is nice to me since it leaned slightly towards skillful play with elements like active dodges, but it's still simple enough to have that grindy, mindless appeal where you're just shredding through mobs. I also like some of the quality of life features that have been added in this sequel, like how you can change characters without losing all of your town progress, since that now carries over across all characters. While it is rather put together and polished, I did have some minor issues with it. The graphics, while pretty, can be almost too pretty to the point of hurting visual clarity, especially for the forest levels I played. And as is the case for many hack and slashes, the simple combat and big and sparse open levels in this can get quite repetitive. Still, I think the fundamentals are good and polished enough to warrant a look in, and I think a game like this will definitely shine with co-op, which I didn't play, so keep that in mind.
Not too bad.
Mandragora is a 2.5D Souls-like Metroidvania action RPG set in a dark fantasy world. Not much to say about this one. You probably got all you needed from that little blurb and from looking at the footage alone. It is, for the most part, just doing your traditional Souls-like fare of sprawling exploration, skill-based combat, and deep build variety. There weren't any particularly unique mechanics I noted in my time with it, but it executes the fundamentals in a rather high quality and polished manner, culminating in a nice 2D Metroidvania experience. So, if you're in the mood for more of that, and judging from the popularity of the genre, I bet a lot of you are, go for it.
Hey, this works.
Dead Wells, the Devil Fragment, is a pretty weird one. It's a first-person melee action RPG, aka Kingsfield-like, that has a really goofy and experimental sense of construction to it that somehow loops over into being somewhat charming. For example, it plays around with some interesting ideas like how depleting an enemy's posture gauge will send them flying into the air, open to being juggled or even smashed into a ceiling for bonus damage. It also brings back Resident Evil-style death cinematics for some reason. I liked it, but when all was said and done though, the game was really rough with loads of bugs, and some of the design elements didn't feel fully thought out. Definitely feels like an indie dev just playing around, throwing everything into their game for funsies, and who can blame them? Not sure how I feel about this. I think it's playing with some good ideas and shows promise, but I don't think I can recommend it outright as it is really rough and buggy in its current state. I'd keep an eye on it though, as it could shine with some polish. ANTONBLAST delivers fast-paced and absolutely explosive platformer action in the vein of Pizza Tower and Wario Land, with a focus on speed, high-score replays, collectibles, secrets, and very stylish and loud presentation. This game gave me an experience that was eerily similar to my experience with Pizza Tower, and I mean that in the best way. Both had me initially intimidated and confused by the overly wacky presentation and the awkwardly complex moveset, but I couldn't help but be charmed by it, and eventually I got into the groove and was having an absolute blast, immediately wanting to go back and replay levels to collect all the secrets and race for high score runs. I know I'm probably late to the party on this, but damn, this is looking absolutely fantastic and a must-buy for me. Demon Crush is a 2D stylish beat-em-up that feels like a combination of both the old platforming action and the new character action of the Ninja Gaiden series. Most of the levels were these crazy war sequences where your allies and the enemies duke it out, with you diving into the chaos as the deciding factor for victory by utilizing the huge amount of tools at your disposal. Grappling up to the roofs to clear out the long-range enemies first, diving back down to smash through the shielded units with your Tonfas, then mopping up the rest of the mooks with your sweeping staff strikes, that kind of stuff. The boss fight at the end was a great capstone to the combat, proving it can handle both horde fights and one-on-ones with sufficient depth. I will say that the game was overwhelming at first. Fights devolved into absolute pandemonium, where it's hard to keep track of friend or foe, and the game shoves a lot of moves down your throat that can be tough to digest so quickly. But near the end, I really started to get into the groove and enjoyed absolutely dunking on enemies.
This works.
The Axis Unseen is an immersive hunting game that blends primitive and magical elements as you hunt all sorts of monsters from folklore, all the way up to giant treants. I love me some immersive HUD-less games such as Trespasser, Far Cry 2, and the Metro series, and this delivered that in spades with a diegetic HUD that is carved into your bow, along with having to pull out objects to check your ammo or show you where the wind is blowing, and having to read your journal to figure out how the game works and keep track of your objectives. Hunting was similarly immersive with the way you need to be careful of what terrain you're walking on so as not to make too much noise, as well as listening for sound cues and looking for tracks to tell you where animals are roaming. While I find a lot of the game impressive, it did feel a bit awkward and unpolished. In particular, there was a weird dissonance between how pretty the game seemed to look and how amateurish it could be in its execution, such as the goofy animations for the animals, awkwardly harsh lighting, the way you get launched into space when you get hit, and so on. The game's mystique also serves as a confusing element. While I was having fun figuring it out, I couldn't help shake the nagging feeling that I could be missing something or going the wrong way. But hey, that's indie games for you, and in spite of all this, I nevertheless found it to be very unique and interesting. Definitely worthy of some attention.
Hey, this works.
As a fan of the classic Police Quest series, the Precinct was right up my alley, being a GTA-like open-world sandbox game where you go through various police activities as you walk your beat. Car chases, helicopter pursuits, shootouts, checking parking meters, issuing fines for violations. There's just so much to see and do, and they all seem to have a deep level of complexity and mechanics to them. Love how you get a big ol' handbook that tells you about all the various crimes you're expected to handle and how. Gotta be sure to use the appropriate level of force, and don't you forget to read them their Miranda rights when you cuff them. If I were to have any misgivings about it, it'd be that the demo was very staged for what I got to play, so I'm not quite sure how much freedom the final product will have. Will it continue to have each day focus on a certain police activity, or will it let me roam free and respond to any crimes I come across? To tell you the truth, I don't think I'd mind either way, because I felt like the game was really well put together, and I am highly looking forward to it.
That's damn good.
Croak Crusader, spawn of the Spore Spectre, is not only a mouthful of a name, but it's a fast-paced, wacky 2D platformer with very grappling-centric gameplay. This one really surprised me. Initial impressions were kinda rough. Levels seemed to be too open and confusing to navigate, enemies too easy to deal with, gray, repetitive graphics, but as I kept playing, I started to get really into it. Not just because the game started stepping things up with a lot more intricate level design that flows well and challenges you, but the grappling mechanic is incredibly satisfying to master and use to fling both yourself and enemies around. So yeah, I easily overlooked the slight imperfections this game had because I couldn't get enough of the sweet, sweet grappling mechanics. Definitely recommend this to anyone wanting those goofy, fast-paced Pizza Tower vibes, but in a new grappling-centric flavor.
Hey, this works.
As much as I try to be a substance over style kind of guy, the first thing that drew my attention to Silly Polybeast was its visual style, and as an action-adventure survival horror game, I was constantly impressed at the cinematography and atmosphere of the various surreal hellscapes Polly has to delve through, in a rather gripping story of trying to reunite with her friend once again after an arson attempt goes terribly, terribly wrong. While the game is plagued by a rather bad English translation, which is pretty bad because it looks to be a story-focused game, I couldn't help but get sucked into the game's world nonetheless, which alongside some nice combat and puzzles, kept my interest until I had made it all the way through the demo before I knew it. Looks like it could definitely serve up a rather emotional and action-packed adventure, so if this catches your eye like it did mine, keep it on your radar. Hopefully they can address the translation quality by the time it comes out for real.
Hey, this works.
Spirit X Strike certainly puts the spectacle in Spectacle Fighter, being an absolutely crazy character action beat-em-up that gives off strong Fist of the North Star and God Hand vibes. This game boasts some incredibly explosive and satisfying fun as you can beat the ever-loving snot out of a bunch of mooks. The combat mechanics seem pretty deep as well, with a lot of room for skill and style expression. Unfortunately, in its current state, it's also quite unpolished, with a terrible camera, wonky hitboxes, straight-up glitches, and an absolute pig of a boss fight, which left me scratching my head trying to figure out the weird Simon Says game that the developer was trying to make me play. It's very easy to see this as an indie developer not quite getting all the nitty-gritty details in place yet, perhaps focusing too much on superficial aspects like making all these wild animations for punching dudes. It's very rough, but it's also so damn cool when you get it to work that I can't help but want to keep my eye on it.
Not too bad.
Rift of the Necrodancer is Crypt of the Necrodancer, but reimagined in the style of a musical rhythm arcade game. To be honest, I'm not even sure why I'm bothering to talk about this, as it is obviously gold. Great music, deep and interesting mechanics with all sorts of crazy monster behavior for the notes, high quality polished look and feel, and so on and so forth. If you like DDR, Guitar Hero, Stepmania, Osu, Everhood, whatever, this is a must buy and delivers a fantastic and addictive rhythm game experience. If I were to have any warnings, it would be that, unless I'm mistaken, the game is just straightforward playing music tracks like an arcade machine would, without any sort of highfalutin story campaign or fancy narrative gubbins like that, so it might feel like a big departure from Crypt if you're expecting more of that. And the amount of rules that you need to memorize for the various monster notes and how you need to handle them is overwhelming. I felt like I was trying to memorize the rules for Papyrus's board game from Undertale, and that was a gag. Still, definitely a solid recommendation, no doubt about that.
That's damn good.
From the devs behind Dead Cells comes Windblown, an isometric action roguelike with co-op and fast-paced, zippy combat reminiscent of games like Hades. Overall, as expected from such a pedigree, it seems like a very high-quality action roguelite. Everything felt buttery smooth and polished, with the combat feeling oh so satisfying. The world and characters seem very cute and charming, and in terms of notable mechanics, you can equip 2 weapons, and when you finish a combo with one, you can do a special switch weapon finisher at the end, opening up a whole new brand of experimentation and skill expression. If I were to be critical of anything, I'd say that, as high quality as it is in terms of game feel, especially for the combat, for me it's lacking that certain je ne sais quoi to it beyond combat to serve as a motivating factor, such as a strong narrative and characters you can see, somewhat similar to games like Hades. However, I do realize this demo doesn't give us the full picture, especially since it doesn't have co-op, which I'm sure is a notable point in its favor. And nitpicks aside, this is good, polished stuff on display here, especially for combat junkies.
That's damn good.
Speaking of great combat, Voin is a first-person melee combat action RPG extraction slicer? We might need a new genre name here. Anyway, it pretty much feels like a combination of Witchfire's extraction shooter action RPG structure, where you go into an open world to beat up bosses, collect loot, and get out, but replace the guns with the viscerally satisfying melee combat you see in games like Vermintide. What impressed me most was that I already felt like the melee system was good at the very start, but once you start adding on all the crazy abilities you get from gear, whoo boy does it feel good to create the perfect killing machine. I will say it could feel a little bit weird at first, at least to me. I know the basics, go in, get loot, get out safely, power up, repeat, but I wasn't quite sure what the end goal was, and the world could feel awkwardly vast and empty at times, which had me begging for more concrete goals, characters to talk to, and interesting world events to keep me motivated. I hear those are in the works though, and I'll still say that, even despite that, the raw, natural satisfaction of cleaving through hordes and powering up motivated me plenty, so I definitely recommend this one to all y'all. Heartworm looks to be your typical indie game that harkens back to the classic survival horror genre with much aplomb. Very much feels like a combination of Resident Evil, Silent Hill, and Fatal Frame all in one. From Resident Evil comes the fixed camera perspective, tank controls, and door transitions. From Silent Hill comes the more open town exploration, deep emotional themes, and surreal dreamscape levels. And Fatal Frame, because your camera is a weapon. Okay, that last one might have been a stretch. You're not getting zero shutter chances or anything like that, but hey. Anyway, I'm not gonna say it's blowing me away or anything like that, but for all intents and purposes, it feels like it is pulling all the classic vibes it wants to off quite competently, so fans of retro survival horror will likely be eaten well with this one.
Not too bad.
Kings of Hell is a 3D arcade beat-em-up, and holy moly, this game absolutely crackles with juicy energy. It's a bit overwhelming at first to get used to the controls, but damn if this doesn't provide a great classic balls-to-the-wall beat-em-up experience, very reminiscent of Dreamcast classics like Dynamite Cop and particularly Power Stone. There's plenty of moves and unique characters that you can use to style on enemies, and the levels are constantly exploding and sending you into new crazy scenarios. 1 second you're on a plane, next second it explodes and sends you falling to earth, then suddenly you're skateboarding down the highway. Not to put too fine a point on it, but the game just has a really goofy charm to it all that I couldn't help but grin ear to ear.
That's damn good.
If I were to sum up Neverlooted Dungeon, I'd say it's like if you made an entire game based on Sen's Fortress from Dark Souls. More directly, it's a first-person immersive sim dungeon crawler, where you carefully make your way through the eponymous Neverlooted Dungeon, trying not to trigger the vast array of deadly traps as you search for shiny, shiny loot. Like a combination of Kingsfield and Thief, it tickles that wonderfully addictive sensation of slowly mapping out an entire area, cleverly using your tools and little improvisational tricks like throwing rocks or stacking crates to bypass hazards, feeling so rewarded whenever you find a secret loot cache, and finally breathing a sigh of relief when you unlock a shortcut or new checkpoint. All this with a rather very tongue-in-cheek comedic vibe, made obvious immediately by the comedically out-of-place signage. It's a rather simple-looking game at first glance, but it nevertheless had me hooked and wanting to see more.
Hey, this works.
Rogue Flight is a space anime arcade rail shooter game in the vein of Star Fox, Afterburner, Space Harrier, all that type of stuff. Altogether, it's a pretty neat rail shooter with great anime presentation and juicy game feel. Got a lot of cool tricks as well, such as barrel rolls to parry bullets, boosts to avoid lock-ons, brakes with an item vacuum effect, drifts with an afterburner whip that can wipe out enemies, and score combos restoring your health, among the usual assortment of weapons and lock-on rockets. There wasn't much to play, unfortunately, being a rather short demo, so I can't be too sure about it, but damn if it didn't feel really promising and a solid bet. Echoes of Yi Samsara is basically a Sekiro-like, a Souls-like action RPG with a focus on intense and stylish parry combat. I'm usually incredibly hesitant with games like this, as they tend to be very style over substance, but this one surprised me with how competent the gameplay felt. It's a blatant Sekiro clone, yes, but one that actually seems to deliver some satisfying clang-based gameplay. I didn't go over it with a fine-tooth comb or anything, but I took to the combat like fish to water and got almost immediately in the zone, feeling fantastic when fighting the bosses, so it impressed me. It's obviously not quite up to the level of polish as the original deal, sure, and the bad translation makes it difficult to recommend, but if you're looking for more Sekiro, this seems to be the place to look.
Hey, this works.
I know everyone probably has their action roguelike needs covered with Windblown, but hold your horses because Lynked, Banner of the Spark is stepping up to the plate, and I was blown away by how much I liked it. I loved the additional wire grapple mechanic, as it seemed to add a lot of interesting environmental improvisation to the combat, being able to grab enemies or objects and chuck them around into each other. Even without the grapple, the combat was solid and satisfying with lots of subtle but great touches, like being able to wall splat opponents for extra damage. As if that wasn't enough, you can team up with your friends for a little co-op action, and the final cherry on top would be its deep and robust village building and management system with very charming and talkative residents. With all that, this baby's loaded for bear and polished to a mere sheen, so be sure not to overlook it.
That's damn good.
I've always had a fondness for that real-time with pause combat you can see in games like Parasite Eve, Vagrant Story, Raido Kuzunoha, and so on, and it seems like the devs for the survival horror RPG Aether Singularity feel the same, as it looks to fulfill that overlooked niche, so I had to check it out. It's a rather short demo, so it's difficult to determine how exactly to feel about it, but it seemed rather charming, and it actually included a whole bonus pack of VR challenges, which were quite fun and fleshed out the combat in an impressive way, due to a lot of interesting enemy variety. So I think it's got promise for a nice little adventure.
Not too bad.
Onikura is a fantastic 2D boss rush game with simple yet stylish combat involving slashing, dashing, parries, and special moves. It reminded me a lot of the good times with games like Mega Man X and Zero, not only because of the crazy 2D boss fights, but the way you can approach the bosses in any order as you please, with each boss giving you a choice between two possible equipment pieces that you can customize to match your playstyle, adding a lot of flexibility and replayability to an already fair and polished gauntlet in my opinion. For fans of other boss rushes like Fury, Titan Souls, and the aforementioned Mega Man games, as well as Sekiro for that parry appeal, I'd say pick this up for sure.
That's damn good.
TetherGeist is a 2D precision platformer with a main mechanic revolving around astral projection, where you can slow down time mid-jump, send your spirit forward a short distance, going clear through any obstacles, and then teleport on over. Gives me vibes of games like Celeste in the best ways. It's got an emotional story of overcoming personal adversity, general gameplay flow where you have a constantly evolving obstacle course to get through with hidden bonus rooms containing challenges to earn collectibles, and smooth as silk, beautiful overall quality of its presentation and game feel. This game is shaping up to deliver a fantastic platforming adventure.
That's damn good.
In a world where the action roguelike genre is populated with game maps that are just randomly generated interconnected rooms of arena fights, Heretical, an action roguelike isometric RPG, stands apart. To me, it feels like an interesting mashup of Dark Souls, Diablo, and Vampire Survivors. It's Dark Souls because of the gloomy, handcrafted world that doesn't change, attack dodge roll combat, and opening up shortcuts to make future runs easier. It's Diablo because of all the random gear and spells you can get each run, the isometric camera, and the mostly simplistic combat. And finally, it's Vampire Survivors, not only because of all the shields and spells and abilities you unlock during your run that passively auto-fire without you doing anything, but it is a run-focused game where each death sends you back to the very beginning, where you can then unlock new classes, equipment, passive power increases, and so on from any achievements and quests you completed. It's a weird combo, but I was surprised at how much fun I was having. It's very Moorish with the way it tries to keep your flow going. For example, it doesn't bother giving you an inventory to play loot Tetris with. You either replace whatever you had with the loot you just got, or you drop it if you don't need it. Simple as. Likewise, for as punishing as being sent back to the start on a run is, I always wanted to get back in there to play a new class, fulfill a new quest, or try a new shortcut out.
Hey, this works.
Erenshor is an old-school MMORPG experience. Or so you'd think, because it is technically completely single-player and filled with bots to simulate those other players. Think games like .hack, I suppose, but to a further degree. The level of simulation it does to recreate an immersive MMORPG experience is fascinating. To start, it has a fake login screen that is so authentically real it made many players confused as to how they were connecting when they weren't online, and how the game knew their credentials without asking. It's all a facade. Even deeper is how it simulates player interaction. If you type LFG in the shout chat or whisper a character to group up, they will respond and, over time, run over to you looking for an invite. It even recognized me writing ding in the chat with a bunch of players celebrating my level up. Anyway, one thing to note is that this is very specifically emulating old-school EverQuest to a T, where you're hailing NPCs, typing in keywords to ask them about stuff, turning on auto-attack to beat up a skeleton, considering monsters for whether they're safe to fight, and so on. I was really expecting it to just be nostalgia bait, but I was pleasantly surprised at how fun it was to explore, finding hidden dungeons and quests with no obvious guidance. Obviously, your mileage may vary if you're not knowledgeable or fond of EverQuest in particular, or if you find the idea of a single-player MMORPG filled with AI bots to be, quite frankly, incredibly depressing. But if you did like EverQuest and would like to play it again but find it too difficult to deal with other people, or you like old-school RuneScape or other MMORPG-esque open-world games, consider checking out the demo and keep a lookout for its eventual release.
Hey, this works.
Last but not least, we got Vivid World, a roguelike party-building auto-battler dungeon crawler from the same people behind Vivid Knight. The basic setup has you wander around a dungeon and collect party members and spell gems, with the party members engaging in auto battles while you support them with spell gems ranging from attacks, buffs, heals, and so on. I'm not usually an auto battler type of guy, but not only did the game have a very charming look and feel, there was something so satisfying in watching the party go while cheering them on with heals and tactical defensive blocks when I saw a big attack coming. I also found it very addicting trying to assemble and upgrade my party into the ultimate fighting force, balancing not only about what actions they have, but considering what certain class types can synchronize with others and unlock bonus passives, and so on and so forth. Again, there's something to be said about a game genre I don't dabble in somehow hooking me because it's just so charming and fun to play. Gotta give it credit for that. Alrighty, that about does it for this Next Fest demo roundup. Thank you very much to all of the indie devs that took part and created these wonderful game demos for me and others to play. I understand how difficult it can be to make a game in the first place, let alone a demo as well when you're already so busy. So let it be known that I am in awe of your efforts. Viewers, I hope that this video brought at least one new game to your attention that might brighten your day, or at least your wish list, and I hope that you too can spread the good word as well. Till next time, cheers all!